Folks, if you want to come sit down, we're going to get started in a minute. Let me start, and then Nando. All right, everybody, let's get started. How's everybody doing? It's nice to see you all. Hooray indeed. My name's Eli Storch, the chair of the Design Advocacy Group. I have both a torso and legs for the first time in many years. So it's wonderful to be back here. And since we are back here, we usually start when we're in person and less effectively online by introducing ourselves, going around the room. So why don't we start in the back, who you are, and we'll go around the room. Yep, you right there. Stand up, tell us your name, and then we're going to go around the room. Sure.
James Appleton, I'm University Architect at Temple University in this platform, one of the vice chairs of DAG Architect. Nando, starting my architect by Danielle.
Caroline Piven, city resident. Peter Piven, I'm with her. City resident of Marketing Management and Carolina.
Amanda Soskin, organizer, platform spaces, specializing in unutilized and vacant space. Curious about this project. Amanda Lloyd, and
She is 30-year city planning and second-year historic preservation. I'm also from I'm also a
I am Taylor Davis, and I'm also second year.
I'm Jim Morris, I'm a second. I'm a Marshall. Ian Litwood, planning.
Eleanor Sharpe, city.
Kristen from Puchalsky, Philadelphia Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability, otherwise known as OTIS. John Chu, Philadelphia Chinatown Stitch. Paul Levy.
Marshall Wallace, Paul Levy.
Nando Micale, the color king. Also from Pennsylvania. OTIS.
Danielle, architect, designer, LRK, co-instructor, co-organizer, and consultant. Hi, Gina Ellis with Able Architecture.
Ian Hester, transportation planner, former DAG fellow, and former second year.
Angeline Pope, project architect, guiding.
Sounds good. All right, let's go around the back.
James Smith, I'm the real estate editor.
Thank you for doing that. It's great to be back with every one of you. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Jelani, especially. Right when we were talking about starting to have events in person, they got in touch and said, you guys should start having events in person. So we were thrilled to take them up on it, and we're working through our calendar and hope to bring everybody together in person more as the year goes on. Speaking of more as the year goes on, Marcia, do you want to tell everyone what's coming up next on the DAG calendar? Sure, come up here.
Okay, thanks, Eli. So on May 20th at 10 a.m., Rebecca Cordes Chan, who is the executive director of the Friends of the Rail Park, will be sharing the preliminary plan for Phase 2, the future of the rail park. And then in June, on the 29th at 10 a.m., Bob Thomas, Bob, you're here now, aren't you? There he is. Bob and Patrick Starr will be talking about another trail, the expanded network of trails. So we're looking forward to that, and I hope you'll all attend. Thanks.
Marcia is an invaluable piece of our puzzle at DAG, so thank you for all that you do. So before we get started, I want to open up the floor if there's any events, advocacy items, anything folks want to share that they're working on that this community would be interested in taking a part of or knowing about. Something we do online, do it in person. If there's anything out there that you want to stand up, let everybody know about, feel free, now's the moment. Yes?
Premier Building Restoration having a hands-on workshop with stone on Twitter. So there'll be a lecture, there'll be a presentation, lunch, and we'll actually do
How do folks find out about that?
come find me. I can't think of the
Yeah.
the website right off. Okay.
Mentioned a little bit about use of townhomes in public so far. Actually, it's a possibility of a settlement on the site. A small portion of the site for housing. And if it happens, any housing built there might be your distance. Very complex, better than what we focus on.
Thanks, George.
Billy Thrive is going to be hosting a summit this weekend on the refinery cocoa redevelopment site. I'd be really interested to see what the community thinks at the summit around there. So Google their website and scheduled for a July.
Yeah, if you didn't hear that, we've been talking to Hilco and are hoping to have them come to DAG in July to go through their plans with their whole team to make sure we're up to date on what's going on with that site.
I'm new to the DAG community, so if anyone's interested in temporary use of vacant land and unutilized spaces for community activation, you see me after engage might be interested.
The most important discussion of the future of Philadelphia architecture that's not in Philadelphia is continuing today and tomorrow in Ahmedabad, India, where Louis Khan's dormitories in management should be under risk of demolition. If anyone is interested in joining this online international conference of dormitories, send me an email. I'm David Brownlee. Will be at hand to get my email address. I'll send you the link. Conference begins tomorrow. The evening in Ahmedabad is 7:30 a.m. tomorrow in Philadelphia.
Thank you, David. Anybody else? All right, well, let's get into it. I do the initial welcome and then let Nando and Danielle take over introducing both our wonderful panel and the students who've taken part in this process. So I'll stop talking, let Nando Micale and Danielle Lake take over from here. Come get after it.
Thanks, Eli. Thanks, everyone, for coming tonight. Danielle and I, as part of DAG, decided that since we were already doing a studio about reconnecting communities, that we could serve as an advocacy forum, an education forum, and a kickoff for the work that the city is going to be doing on the Reconnecting Communities grant that they've received. So there was a convergence of our roles as advocates through DAG and our roles as adjunct professors at Penn. And if you didn't catch that, Danielle and I teach that group of students who were saying that they were second-year students in urban design at Penn. So, and Danielle will come up later after the panel and give an introduction about that studio and about that. But I think, from my perspective, this is an incredible moment in Philadelphia to start to undo some of the incredible violence that was done on our city in the name of cars. And that will tell you a little bit about my bias. And I wanted to sort of first start off by saying that, and then without editorializing anymore, introduce the panel and allow them to give their perspective on what they're about to engage in So I will introduce the panelists. Eleanor Sharpe, and can you stand up, Eleanor? Eleanor is the Executive Director of the City Planning Commission. She leads a team that engages residents, businesses, and other stakeholders to plan the future of Philadelphia. Eleanor is also Deputy Director of the Planning and Zoning. She oversees Philadelphia City Planning Commission, Historical Commission, and Art Commission, and the staff of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. In the past, she has been the Planning Director of the City of New Rochelle, and has served at the University of Pennsylvania in different roles, including the Netter Center for Community Partnership. I first met Eleanor when she was a student, and she was an intern for me in my practice at Wallace Robertson Todd. Eleanor has a Bachelor's of Architecture degree from Howard University, and again, a Master's of City Planning from... She was one of those second-year students, yeah. You're not coming back, are you? I mean, that seems like a bad idea. And John Chin, I don't know if you stand up, John, so people see you. John is the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to preserve, protect, and promote Chinatown as a viable ethnic and residential business community. I want to say this about him: his core value of self-determination of neighborhoods results from an experience of the decades of environmental injustice imposed upon Chinatown. He's passionate about equitable development for all people, income, race, ethnicity, self-identity, and ability. I actually first met John teaching a first-year studio at University of Pennsylvania when he was gracious enough to allow very green first-year students do a master plan for Chinatown North. Next, I'd like Christopher Puchalsky to stand up. Oh, am I doing my things? And actually, I've talked with Chris before because he's served as a critic and an information specialist for our studio. But I did learn something new when he put together his bio. Chris is the Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at OTIS, as he mentioned earlier. His past professional experience includes designing engines for the Ford Motor Company. So that was pretty amazing, and he has quite a journey through his career, including teaching as an adjunct at the University of Pennsylvania, University of Waterloo, and he has served as the Director of Transportation and Planning at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. He has a bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering from Temple, which is my alma mater, as well as a PhD in urban transportation systems engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. And last, but of course not least, and most everyone knows Paul. Paul is the founding executive director of the Philadelphia Center City District, serving in the capacity since 1991. The CCD is a business improvement district with a $31 million annual operating budget, which supplements municipal services with programs for security, hospitality, cleaning, placemaking, place marketing, and planning, business retention, and the attraction for Central Business District for the city of Philadelphia. Paul is the go-to person for everything about Center City, and particularly as it relates to planning and the history of how the city has developed. He has also served as a specialist for our students, giving them some perspective, having done some work on the corridor previously to this work. So he is a graduate of the City Planning Department at the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD from Columbia University. So without further ado, and since we can get started, I'm going to call them up to the stage, and they're going to give their presentation on the Crosstown Stitch. Oh, I guess first you go one at a time. Sure. Yeah.
There we go. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Nando, for the introductions. And I really like the time that we take at the beginning to honor everybody that came today. So thank you very much. Oh, I need to stand up there so I can hit the buttons, I think. So John and I are going to start by tag teaming this presentation. And I'll do a little bit. John will talk about the neighborhood, and I'll talk a little bit more. But just real quick, if you're not familiar with this term, what is a cap? In this context, it's not a bottle cap. It's not a baseball cap. It's a highway cap. And I've got pictures of 3 very different caps here from 3 different places. It is some structure that we put on top of a below grade highway. What that structure contains, it can contain any number of things. On the far side, you see Columbus, Ohio. You see essentially a widened bridge structure that has some low-rise buildings on it. And what this does is that if you're walking down the street, it preserves that regularity of buildings. So you're not quite sure, you don't know that you're walking over top of the highway. And then there's some larger caps here that, again, some widened bridge structures that are kind of greenery, or a very large bridge structure that has a lot of greenery and a park on it. So if we're talking about cap today, that's what we're talking about. John, could you talk about the neighborhood?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So here you have a photograph of what we would call the playground at the Holy Redeemer Chinese Catholic Church and School. And the reason this photo is here is because the community galvanized and organized against Expressway when they learned that the highway would take the front half of the church away. But I think the community residents had enough intuition and knowledge to that you don't take half a church away, right? If you're going to take a building away, the whole church and school would probably be demolished for the highway, or not survive the highway. And this church and school was founded in 1941 by a Catholic priest by the name of Father Kavanaugh, who actually went out to raise the funds to build the church and school. And to give the context at this time, 1941, there are some members of that very first class that attended the Holy Redeemer School, and they loved this school and they cherished the school. It gave a great education, but what it gave Chinese Americans at that time, this Chinatown was a sanctuary away from racism, and this school gave the students also a sanctuary away from any racist experience that they experienced in outside schools, right? So when you talk to those few people that attended the first years of Holy Redeemer, and even many generations later, these people have a really, really strong connection to the school because it was a place of community. It gave them a strong identity as Chinese Americans. And because they attended an institution among people that looked like them and spoke the same native language as their families, it gave them this confidence to be what someone would call a proud Philadelphian. So that's what this really symbolizes. And this was one of the, there was a Yellow Seeds newsletter, a group of young university activists, some attending University of Pennsylvania. And this organizing created all different types of groups that came together to educate people about the Expressway, to educate people where Chinatown was located and how the Expressway would impact Chinatown. And again, the News Expressway was 1966, and that's the first time that PCDC, Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation, was formed just as a loosely knitted community activist group, which later incorporated in 1969 to become Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation. And during that time, if you know the history of urban development, CDCs are an industry that rose out of that time period to combat blight and rebuild communities. The photo to your left is an image of the residents, the kids who lived in Chinatown at that time, when the call rang out that the bulldozers were coming. The lore is that one kid jumped up on the pile and other kids were knocking on doors to get the other kids out. And this is actually symbolic of the spirit of the community, when we're doing a survey right now for the Stitch, asking people their opinions of what the cap could be, what it could be used for. The respondents don't necessarily understand planning or transportation. But what they do know is that when something is proposed that has an impact on their lives, like the Vine Street Expressway, and that rubble was their neighbor's home along Winter Street, 10th and Winter Streets. That rubble was their neighbor's home. And the lived experience of the people in Chinatown, knowing that their friends will be displaced and moved out of Chinatown, this is the kind of emotion that we extract from the Vine Street Expressway. And going back to the survey that we're doing right now, people can't comprehend what this means for them. But when we tie it into this emotional connection to Chinatown and how this can change the lives, they get it a little bit, right? And the one to the right is just a picture of again, kids protesting the highway. So I'm just going to close with this, is that I was born and raised in Chinatown. And when you've lived with a highway structure like this all these years, and before this, Paul Levy is going to show you some photographs. This was actually a boulevard already, even before the below-ground expressway came up. Yeah, I knew nothing other than the expressway was here. The Holy Redeemer School was on the north side of the expressway, where away from the core of Chinatown. We had bars on every corner. When we grew up in this community and didn't know any better, and didn't know that people outside Chinatown lived different lives and had more amenities and a better quality of life, the expressway was just something we lived with and dealt with. So, and again, I go back to the fact that this engagement process that Chris is going to talk about shortly, we have to emotionally connect people to the opportunities about quality of life and amenities. And if we can do a good job of that, I think we're going to do a really great job of extracting what people really want as part of this vision for the capping. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, John. So the city of Philadelphia, about 6-ish months ago, working with John, started a study to say, what can we do here? How can we address this historic harm? And when I think about the harm, I think I kind of put it in two buckets. There was the historic harm that was done during the construction of the expressway, and you saw that in the knockdown houses and the displacement that happened in some of those images. But the other piece is the harm that is continuing to happen every day to residents of the community. It's happening from the expressway going past them, the noise and pollution that they have to suffer. But just, and maybe even more importantly, is there's not just the expressway, there's the local lanes that go through Chinatown and through Center City. And that is just as much and sometimes more of a danger. So people are exposed to the traffic danger and also the pollution and the noise from those local lanes. People are just got off the highway, they're about to get on the highway, they think they're already on the highway, they're traveling at extreme rates of speed. And people have to cross that facility every day to go between the north and the south side of the community. From little kids going to school to senior citizens. I've been able to come to the Crane Building a number of times when they have the food distribution there on some afternoons, and people have to cross the local lanes, and people going way, way too fast. Actually, the local lanes are on the high injury network, and if you don't know about that, this is a tool that OTIS developed as part of our Vision Zero initiative to really target where is the traffic safety problems in Philadelphia. The high injury network is the 12% of city streets that are responsible for 80% of the killed and serious injury crashes that happen in our city. So the local lanes are extremely dangerous, more dangerous than the streets north and south of them. And that's a problem, and that's what we have to try to identify. So right now there's a city-funded study, and we're trying to pull it all together. And if I could just skip to that bottom bullet, the goal is that by sometime this fall we get to a single, comprehensive, cohesive alternative for how we can address this problem. Identifying areas for capping, providing traffic calming solutions. I won't read all the bullets on this slide, but putting it together to get to a single solution. There's been a lot of great work over the last 20 years. We're not starting from scratch. The community, ever since, and even before the expressway was built, they were dreaming of how they were going to address this harm. And our goal is to try to really synthesize this into something that we can build. The study area that we're working on right now is 676 through the Chinatown, so from about Broad to 8th Street. There's certainly needs on the west side of town, but when we said, okay, what do we think we can really break off, get a handle on, we said let's focus on the areas that we thought were the most historic harm. The expressway was built here later. There was more damage to existing communities, and if you look at the various environmental justice maps, it's much more on the east side of Broad Street here than on the west side of Broad Street. So for us, this had to be a priority to address the Vine Street Expressway and the disconnection it causes in the community today. So let me go back to that in just a second. So this is something that was come up with in 2016. There was one of the many studies, and there's several others if you're interested. I don't want to take all the time. But one of the studies was this 2 or 3 day design charrette called Every Place Counts. It was done in about 5 studies. It was at the tail end of the Obama administration. You had a team from FHWA came, a bunch of experts, and they really worked with the community and a bunch of local leaders to come up with a number of concepts. They didn't get to a single concept, but they had a bunch of ideas. That was okay, because we were going to come back, next year when during the President Clinton administration in 2017 happened, and we're going to pick this work up. And then, that didn't happen, unfortunately, and we had a federal partner who was not interested in this kind of work, unfortunately. So it sat a little while, and then, fast forward to the Biden administration. In the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we really had a federal partner that said, hey, we believe in this work, we recognize the harm, we own the harm, and we want to do something to address it. And so part of that was just a different mindset at the federal partners, but then it was also funding that came with it in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the city won a grant. We won a little over $1.8 million, and between a number of our partners, we're going to be able to match that and bring it up to $4 million. And what that's really going to be able to do is going to allow us to take whatever that concept is that we get to, hopefully by the end of this fall, through a detailed engineering and public engagement process, develop that into a concept that has enough engineering behind it, so that we can really apply for construction funds. So that's what this $4 million is going to do. It's also going to allow us to, I think, answer some key questions that people keep asking me and that my colleagues in the Planning Commission keep asking me is, what would a major piece of infrastructure like a highway cap in Chinatown do? How would it affect the businesses in there, business affordability? How would it affect the housing markets, housing affordability? The last thing we want to do is replicate a pattern of displacement that the investment, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s had on the community with, albeit different type of displacement that would happen from a major infrastructure investment. So one of the things that we need to do is develop an equity vision and then develop concrete plans and strategies to make sure that the people that we really want to benefit from this investment, who've suffered with this investment, with this facility, for the last 50-odd years, can really benefit from the investment. So just quick timeline. We're trying to get to applying for construction funding in 2026 from the federal government. And if we go backwards from that, that's the reason of that year, that's the end of the bipartisan infrastructure law. We think those, 2025, 2026, there'll be federal funds available for us to apply. And this just works backwards on all the activities that we have to do. I don't want to ruin everybody else's time, but please take the survey if you can. This is on our website, SurveyMonkey/r/Stitch, and it's in other languages also. And then we are having a public visioning workshop on April 26th in the evening. I can't remember. I think it's 4 to 6 or something like that. And it's at the Holy Redeemer Church. So please come. There'll be boards, there'll be surveys. If you're really interested in this, come weigh in, tell us what you think, what your priorities are.
Great. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to join in this conversation. I want to do two things. I want to kind of look back to understand what occurred here, and then look forward as to what I think are the possibilities. And I'll be a little troublesome by trying to separate things that may be emotionally true from those things that may be actually and historically true, because I think it's important to understand that here. So if you look back, you're looking at the city of 1930 without any highways at all. We have just the Benjamin Franklin Parkway and a fairly wide Delaware Avenue. The real beginning and the change came with the building of the Ben Franklin Bridge in 1924. And when that landed and came into the city, it had a really significant effect. Peter, that's Ridge Avenue you asked me about. So the green line I'm drawing there is Vine Street. And so what you had is this huge volume of new traffic coming off of the bridge that needed to be integrated into the city's grid. And Vine Street was a street the same width as Race Street at this time. This is the 800 block of Race Street in the 1920s. This is the same block. This was Skid Row. This was not Chinatown. This is where the drunks and the homeless people of the era lived, basically, and Chinatown began below this. Those of you who are city planners know historically that the big move to rethink this city started with the 1947 Better Philadelphia Exposition, which was both how to build what we call a post-industrial city today, but also how to integrate the automobile. And at that same time, Oscar Stanoroff, a very well-known architect, drew this picture of what Vine Street might become, a widened boulevard that would frankly connect to the Ben Franklin Bridge. The demolition that occurred in 1951, not for the building of the highway. This street was dramatically widened in 1951, long before there was an expressway. And that fit into a vision which was the formal city plan in '63. And it's worth looking at this because we know I-95 and we know the Schuylkill Expressway, but there was a proposed crosstown expressway, for those old enough in the room to remember, that was stricken from the city plan in 1972 with a lot of community opposition to that. And that then led to a whole plan for ramps off of I-95 into Queen Village, which then led to another generation. And the decisions around Vine Street were very much influenced by those PennDOT city battles at that time, and I'll come back to that point. But the real beginning from the other end was the Schuylkill Expressway opened in 1956. And that dumped all this huge amount of traffic onto David Brownlee's City Beautiful Benjamin Franklin Parkway. And it became overloaded with cars. And so that was the genesis of the first depressed portion. These are the drawings, how it would cut right through the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. And that was a huge process of the 1950s and 60s that dramatically altered the Benjamin Franklin Parkway and made it essentially an interstate. The surface road remained on the east side of town well into the 60s and 1970s. Not until the 1980s did planning begin for a depressed Vine Street Expressway. And what was occurring was the huge volume of traffic coming off of Vine Street came up to grade at Broad Street, and traffic was coming the other way off the Ben Franklin Bridge. And so you had this huge volume, and then when I-95 began to open, that dumped another volume of traffic. That's the genesis of the ramps that really were the ones that assaulted Holy Redeemer Church. It was really the Vine Street off-ramps. And that was the first time, all right, we need a modern highway. Really go back in time, David Williamson, working for Bill Green, came up with the idea of a neighborhood-friendly highway compared to I-95 and what the Crosstown Expressway would be. But this planning began and the construction did not start until the late 1980s. And this was the finished product in 1991. And going back to something that Chris said, there's the highway and the surface roads. And as much damage has been done by the surface roads has been done by the highway. And for a long time, I felt we could simply narrow those surface roads. In fact, you know you can, because the police who used to be at the 6th District took the entire lane anyway for their cars. So but we had excess highway at street level and at the lower level here. And that then gets us to this current reality in which it's both depressed Vine Street and surface highway. Now, the thought and the conversation starts with this idea of, well, could we cap it and could we cover it with parks? Could we cover all of it with parks? And one of the things I heard Chris say that I really want to underscore is we live in an era of approaching these projects just from the community planning side, but this simultaneously needs to be approached from the engineering feasibility side. And I know Chris is focused on that, but I want to underscore that because there are places where we probably can't cap it unless we're willing to give up on-ramps and off-ramps. And so you have whole sections. We retained urban engineers in Pinoni, 2 engineering firms who worked on this, to do a preliminary look. And there are places where those ramps make it impossible. And then there are places of the how you deal with the side walls. And of course you say a cap, let's just put a roof on top of it. But there's a really serious question I know Chris is going to be looking at. But the simple model is the one on the left, which is we get rid of the overhang wall and we put some pediment on top and put a cap on top of that. That's the left. If the retaining walls were designed to carry that weight. If they were not designed to carry that weight, then what you see on the right side is some major reinforcing of those supporting walls. And just to put a number on that, Urban and Pinoni basically said the cost of a simple cap of that side wall was $700 a square foot. If you have to support, it's $4,000 a square foot. So what I'm urging here is the community planning process has got to be wedded with what realistically can be built and what can be afforded. Those things need to come together in this process. But what I think is most interesting is the question, should it only be a park? Or should we consider some form of overbuild over the highway? And I want to just briefly end on that. Could it be just townhouses, and could you reknit the city back together in that way? The point to me is that planning to cover this is a process, and the capital costs are just step one. We know so many highways and edges of highways that are miserably maintained at this point. Just go out the Schuylkill Expressway, go along I-95, and so without a dedicated budget that pays for the maintenance, the landscaping, the upkeep of this, we're going to leave a legacy of another concrete mess out there or a park that we can't maintain. And historically, when the 16th and Vine garage was built, the deal was cut that the revenue from that garage would maintain I-95 and the landscaping along I-95, but not the landscaping along Vine Street. So you know the planters west of Broad Street that are all dead, right? So we built these amenities, but we didn't put in a budget to maintain them. So I'm very enthusiastic about the notion of covering. But 2 things. If you thought of overbuild over it, which actually added housing and could actually knit the city back together, could you recapture revenue? Or could there be ground leases, which would be a dedicated revenue stream to provide maintenance? So to me, a really interesting model, those of you who know the Brooklyn Bridge Park, is a wonderful park is built with housing next to it, and all that housing is on a ground lease, and that is a perpetual dedicated revenue stream to pay for maintenance. Why I'm focusing on this is we maintain Dilworth Park at a cost of about $5 million a year, and we subsidize that right now to the tune of $3 million a year, all right? You do not make money running parks. Just start with a fact. We have a Department of Parks and Recreation seriously underfunded. We cannot develop this project unless there is a conscious and clear plan for how we maintain it and how we make it an amenity and have it be a real legacy that not just we got it covered, but that we can maintain it and make it a wonderful asset. So I just want to leave it there as the challenge, I think, which Chris will solve.
Thank you. Round of applause for our presenters. I'm your facilitator for the evening, and I'll be engaging in light conversation, and we'll take some questions at the end. Very valid point. We're going to get back to your takeaways, Paul, but I want to start with John, who oftentimes when we talk about community, and this time sometimes we're thinking specifically about the Chinatown community now, and I just want to ask, who is a Chinatown community, and can you break that down for us? Like, is it a monolith? Is it not? How is it constituted?
The answer to that question is very complicated. I think the basis of our neighborhood is really the residents and workers and the property owners, right? And there's a significant amount of residents, but also we have over 300 businesses that include ground floor businesses and businesses upstairs, professional offices, legal offices, accountants, and that type of business. Once we go beyond that, I can tell you that Chinatown, and I'm sure many people here know this, it's a hub. You know, because we have this authentic identity as an Asian American hub where people can come for services, to shop, to eat, to socialize in a culturally appropriate way, and also in a language that many speak Mandarin and Cantonese. So we're a hub for the larger region. So when we talk about this Chinatown community, it's the critical mass that experiences the impact 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, are the people who live in Chinatown. And then the periodic shopper that comes on the weekend, or goes to Chinese school in Chinatown, or goes to religious services in Chinatown. They feel Chinatown is their second home, sometimes primary home. And they have a huge say in the relationship that they have with Chinatown.
Thanks. The reason why I'm asking is because such a project such as this, the immediate impact would be on the adjacent community, who happens to be Chinatown. So I was just curious, what part or how do we engage them in the process? And I know Chris mentioned the event on April 26th, and I'll get to Chris in a minute. But from your perspective, how challenging is it to engage Chinatown in civic discourse? Because I know at the Planning Commission, we work with you a lot because we have a hard time reaching the people who live and work there, who are living and working and don't necessarily have time to show up for a public discourse such as this.
Yeah, it's very, very challenging because their priority is to ensure that they put food on the table for their families. So the priority is work, is ensuring that the family lives in a safe environment and has opportunities for their children for a education that takes them through post-secondary education. This is really the focus of the residents, right? And when we talk about neighborhood planning, and we've been doing planning for a long time now in Chinatown, it's really hard to get them engaged. So people are focused on immediate issues. And you know, Paul and I were just talking before the program started about safety. People are focused on ensuring that they feel like they're living in a safe neighborhood. These are the immediate priorities. And even PCDC, when we do planning exercises, we actually have a network of go-to organizers and people who are trusted in the community. They're knocking on doors, they're calling people, they're using text or WeChatting people, because we actually have to exert ourselves to get people to come to these planning exercises. In fact, Chris, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but the surveys, of the 1,300 surveys, there's a small percentage, less than 10%, were surveys done in the Chinese language. So Caroline, who works on my staff, they were out there this week, and they will continue to be out there knocking on doors. And in fact, on my way over here, I was talking to a business owner at the Canto House, and he said, "I want to talk to you about the Stitch." because he just learned about it because Caroline was in his business yesterday. And he was very interested in giving his opinion, but unless we meet them where they're at, it's really hard.
It's really hard. And so I'll pivot to Chris, who this project will impact Chinatown, but it's a large project that will impact the city, especially depending on what we end up utilizing the land for in terms of economic development, et cetera. But what's the wider engagement strategy for the city at large beyond Chinatown?
Yeah, so like any of these projects, you kind of have to do the A to Z engagement strategy. It's, so there's the online survey that we're trying to reach people and all the mass media ways of reaching people. And like John said, we've gotten a great number of surveys from people who live outside of Chinatown, actually to the point where we're saying, I think we need to get more surveys from people who are actually residents in Chinatown.
Yeah.
We're doing mailers. We're doing, we're trying to youth engagement. So we're working on a coloring book to engage kids in schools. We're doing the visioning workshops. So we're trying to hit as many of the touch points as we can. And I think, John touched on this, is that there's the residents, the businesses, the visitors, but then there's this wider metropolitan, Chinese community that I think are really important to reach also. But then there's the neighborhoods like in Callow Hill, et cetera, and, kind of greater center city that are going to be affected by this investment. It's important to engage them too.
To both Chris and John, you pulled together this Reconnecting Communities grant application. Can you share any lessons that you gathered regarding the importance of developing partnerships, determining the levels of community participation, and our hunt for funding, which is always top of mind?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about the institutional side, and maybe John, could you talk about the community side? So, for me, the first partner to engage was PennDOT. It's their facility. Nothing is going to happen without them saying yes to it. And ultimately, they might even be the owners of some of the new infrastructure they built. They're most likely going to be the construction managers. If you look at the cap on I-95 at Penn's Landing, that was developed by, the early work was done by a bunch of different folks, but then ultimately it was PennDOT who did the final design and funded the project. So, or had the funding go through them. So it was really important for us to get PennDOT on board. And to their credit, for their facility, they were, not shy at all about looking at this and being willing to kind of look at this fresh and say, yeah, there's something we need to do here. So they've been a great partner. And then I think the other part was engaging the federal, Department of Transportation. So John and we went to an event up in Boston, and we were able to directly engage the program officers in the Reconnecting Communities pilot, get to know them, tell them our story.
Yeah, so it's really about a repeating of the story. And, when we learned about reconnecting communities and we read about it, we said, this is us. This is Chinatown. This program's talking about undoing the harm. And it brought back memories in 2017, maybe 2018. Then former U.S. Secretary of Department of Transportation, Anthony Fox, came down to unveil the report, Every Place Counts, which you saw an image of. And so we, the community, we can demonstrate and we can talk about the harm. We have the enthusiasm to correct the wrongs. We have the right to demand that this funding comes to our community. But what we don't have, and we know this, is the planning and transportation expertise. We don't have all the resources that we need to make this happen. So I think we went into this partnership fully aware of what we're really good at and what we're not good at. And this actually includes not only OTIS and PennDOT, but there needs to be other people at the table, and they're the funders. So we're really fortunate to have Knight Foundation as enthusiastic about this. In fact, they were looking at these types of projects across the country, and that's why Chris and I were at Boston, because Knight Foundation brought in Harvard Kennedy School, right, to host this seminar about transportation, about reconnecting communities. So, yeah, we bring a strong contribution to the process, but we know where we're weak.
Can I just add something about how slick John is? At this event, there's people from a lot of different cities. There's people from a lot of different, federal offices, and they were said, okay, this is great, but don't just pitch and sell your project. And then John stood up, gave a presentation where he totally pitched and sold the Chinatown, the need to reconnect this community here, and it worked.
Thanks. I'm going to riff off something that Paul said, which was new to me in seeing the presentation, and I'm wondering if everybody else had this perspective. I was under the impression that the divide in Chinatown, I'm not underestimating the highway, but there was a divide that existed across 10 lanes of highway prior to the expressway being put in. And so when we say to put back Chinatown how it was, are we talking about even before that? Like, I just want to unpack that a little bit, because there seemed to have been a physical, that's on the right slide, but there was a 10-lane highway that was running along through Chinatown to begin with, so.
Well, this is, I think, where the difference between emotionally true and factually true really matters, because I think if I would think about the goal here is what we excel at as a city is this intimate scale pre-automobile street grid, right? And our best streets that way. Now, we need to accommodate the automobile in that. Jump to a different context. Everybody knows the project that National did on Market East, where the 2 residential towers went up right across from the Reading Head House. We did a whole Market East as super blocks, large and tire dominating blocks. And what they did incredibly well is do a unified project for an entire city block, but break it down and re-add the scale of the city. That, to me, is the model of what needs to happen on Vine Street. So one big massive park is not success for me. It's reintegrating the grid. And, I think this is an important point, because no, I don't think you want to recreate 1951.
No, I'm not.
But you're not going to get back to 1928 either. So the question is how we have a highway there, unless I know the students are going to completely abolish the highway in one of their schemes, so you'll wait for that one. But we're going to cover that, and then what goes on top of it, knitting the city back together, to me, is about the street grid, the intimate scale, and mixed use is what I think is really key.
Thank you. And I'll tie it back to something else you said, and Chris might be able to weigh in on this, because I also want to level set expectations. And I'm glad to hear that PennDOT's at the table, because part of this will not happen without PennDOT, true? And if they determine that it's not structurally safe or whatever reason to cover it, it will not happen. And if we determine that it is, we'd have to find money a la the tune of, I don't know, $4,000 per square foot today, maybe $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 by the time it gets to construction. So level set for me as we go along. What is really and truly, is this a done deal, or we're exploring here? This is a feasibility study.
Yeah, it's not going to be a done deal until all the funding packages together for construction, and that won't be happen for a few years. I think what we can do now is set ourselves up for success, and to maximize the likelihood that we can this is going to be attractive to whoever's the president in 2025, 2026, whoever is leading the state that year, whoever is the next mayor, and whoever's leading, every other institution and community group that needs to be involved. So for me, that means this project is really about finding the center, of this Venn diagram of 3 different circles. The first circle is what meets the community need. What do folks want to see? And I can say what I think would be good, and we can all say what we think is going to be good, but until we have some synthesis and consensus on the community needs, no project will be successful if we don't meet that. Then there's the structural feasibility. Can we build it? How do we build it? And then the third part is how do we pay for it? And I think there's the 2 pieces. There's the how do you fund the construction, but then how do you fund the ongoing operations and maintenance expenses? And so if we can, those are each a circle, and if we can find the center where they all overlap, then I think we'll maximize our likelihood of getting federal, state, and local funding to pay for this project.
And let me jump in. I know you have another question, but not to jump on where the students are going to come out. right? But if you proposed that we're going to completely eliminate the Vine Street Expressway as a highway, can you imagine the trucking industry and all the automobile forces that will become arrayed against it, right? So I would be pragmatic here. I think you want to cover it. You don't want to take on the entire automobile industry and wreck this project in a process, as much as you might want to get rid of it. So I would be pragmatic about how to cover it and not activate a whole set of opponents who can derail it. Now, you've got to go for the maximum community and city benefit, but this has got to not unleash, you know.
That was going to be part of my question.
Right.
How do we determine the highest and best use for the potential future land, and how to best get buy-in, which it sounds like don't piss people off, especially the auto.
Look, I mean, there are places where it's worth pissing people off. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, going up against the highway industry, the interstate highway, I mean, there's times to do it, and people have defeated the Crosstown Expressway, so it's doable, right? But I would say here, to answer your specific question, I think, you know, to me, we want to get this huge gap in the city covered over. We want the pedestrian fabric restored. And to me, why I at least entertain the idea of buildings on top is walking across a vast empty park is not success, right? Walking across an animated park, or if there's interesting buildings or cafes, that there's lots of public space. So for me, it's how you create an animated area of the city where we have parks, we need them, but where we have actually buildings and people and businesses there should be an objective, if you can do it on top of this cover.
I like the segue, so maybe my last question before we get to the audience, and each one of you can answer this. As this process unfolds, can you share with us what markers that would indicate success for you along the way? John, Chris, Paul.
Okay, along the way. So we're trying to figure out where we want to return this Vine Street to. I remember the day, I don't want to return to the day where I remember I used to cross Vine Street to go to Holy Redeemer School. In grade school, they had these 18-inch wide pedestrian things along the way, 4 or 5 of them, and the guys selling pretzels with car soot all over the pretzels. I don't know if you remember that. We don't want to go there. But I think success for me is getting through this year's planning process and engaging the community, getting them really excited and passionate about the possibilities, and then getting to the next phase where we can spend more time in looking to engineering to tell us what the real possibilities are. I think Chinatown is a commercial hub. We recognize that there is a revenue and expense, so I think our community is willing to be realistic about what's possible for the uses.
Yeah, I would slightly disagree. I think I'd get to the same place you do, but that I would run the engineering feasibility and the community planning process absolutely simultaneously. You do not want to raise expectations that are unbuildable, right? Because then you'll wind up with people really disappointed. So I think they've got to run in parallel, and people have got to say, yeah, we can pull this off or can't, but you're the guy who's got to do it, so you answer.
Yeah, I think you got to do both at the same time. I think you got to avoid this trap, though, where you only bring things that are fully baked and figured out to the community. But you also don't want to just put pie in the sky. And I think we're successful in our work once we understand the trade-offs that we have to make and find a way to explain them and get the community to engage in those same trade-offs about what they'd like to see, and what they don't want to see, what their priorities are. Would they rather see some modest caps like the Columbus example on the, essentially some widened bridges or would they rather, have like the whole thing capped, but know that it might take 3 decades for us to get there? I think to answer your question, Eleanor, it's, do we get to a concept that meets the Venn diagram of it meets the community needs? It's structurally engineering feasible, and we can afford it both in the construction. And then it'll be successful over the next 3 years if we can take that planning level concept, work out all the fine details, and have a construction funding application that really excites people with money.
I would just add a slightly different gloss. Imagine you had been through that process and it was right now. You would want every candidate for mayor saying, I'm fully in favor of this cover plan, right? You don't want dissension. You want a clear community consensus because you're going to be competing for competitive scarce federal dollars. You don't want static and competition at home. You want everybody in the city saying, yeah, we want this. This is Philadelphia's project.
Yeah, agreed. I'll open up the floor to any questions, sir.
I will admit that, thanks to John, I learned today that I have been laboring under false assumption that because it took the bulk of the traffic off the surface streets, the Vine Expressway made the side roads. So it is not.
It does not.
And I'm wondering, we're sitting here talking about this, and somebody mentioned that, the 6th East District used to use one of the lanes of surface roads as a parking lane. Wouldn't just turning one of those outer road lanes each direction into parking or a bike lane help make that road safer?
Chris?
Yes, great comment. And there's something called the Reviving Vine Street plan that DVRPC has already adopted. It's in the pipeline, and there are plans for a bike lane to calm traffic down. And so yeah, these have been talked about, and it makes total sense.
That seems like low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, low-hanging fruit probably still costs $10 million, but I think, if you've got about 3 moving lanes on the average cross-section, I think you could, it's not too difficult to take one. I think the question is, can you take 2? And, what would one each direction, or can you take 2 in each direction and still have traffic flow at a rate that doesn't drive everybody crazy?
I saw quite a few hands. I'm going to keep going. Anybody? Yes?
I know it's a really good process, but if you have to, you've got several hundred yards of covered area, look at the environmental impact of what that would do. Boston, carbon capture possibility.
Yeah, no, but I think cleaning up the air, is going to be an important priority. And since at least we're taking as a given the expressway underneath, that those emissions have to go somewhere. And so how can we design the environments to fix some of the air quality impacts in the local community?
Others? Yes.
Let me try to introduce a little bit of why can't we have nice things and let's be optimistic.
Because we're poor.
I observed the project construction of the plazas, which on the west side of town ended around 2020. It's actually one of the best managed, well-run, large construction projects of Philadelphia. Happened very quickly and accomplished objectives. Plazas, which is already there, have foundation. Difficult at this, absolutely. But if O'Neill got money from Boston, we can't do this. I don't know what we're doing. I hope we can accomplish.
I think the goal is to try.
Yeah, if we can get the Speaker of the House from Philadelphia,
Back from
then,
the dead, right?
yeah, maybe if Dwight Evans becomes Speaker of the House sometime in the future, it'll be a lot easier than if he doesn't.
But George, that park makes my point. There is nothing going on in it. Nobody owns it. Nobody's programming it.
Other questions? Yes, over here.
This is a question for John, and with the Sixers Arena as well as the Vine Street Stitch, I'm curious, how do you guys sort of consider, community in planning? I think that might.
Okay, I thought you were going to put this arena on top of the expressway.
There's a thought.
It's
Done.
All the traffic will be taken care of.
PCDC is constantly planning. We've done big neighborhood plans, and in between, we're always planning. So yeah, I think the community has a limited appetite. We talked about priorities and short-term priorities. That's very true. But I think the capping is I called it, I didn't realize that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I think these types of things can get passion going, especially for those old timers who've lived in Chinatown for a long time. And, I think it's just, PCDC has been doing planning. We know how to do, we know how to engage people, and we're just going to continue to do that.
Can I say something about I think there's, you ever get in a fight at work and then go home and start yelling at your family member? I
No,
do worry.
Chris.
No, never? You're better than me. I think there's a danger, just people's, blood pressure getting up, and then it's making that a little more complicated to then engage and learn and compromise on the cap. So I think that's an issue.
I saw Inga.
What was the last thing?
Couldn't support buildings. Didn't support the buildings.
Right.
Do you? We do.
Sandy's our.
The Prudential Center in the same city. Massachusetts Turnpike actually runs under the shopping center and 52-story skyscraper that sits on top of it.
Did you have another one, Paul?
They're doing one right now in Atlanta too, but I can't remember the name of the project. They're doing it right now. Yeah.
Jamie Granger from our team is here, and I think he's looked at a bunch of examples of caps. And I think it's the difference between building like a 1-story building and a 52-story building are very different challenges.
Yes,
But-
they are, but they can.
Yeah. That's why I think Paul's point is critical. How we value engineer what happens there becomes critical. I'm not getting any signals, so I'll take more questions. Yes.
That's one was my comment to Sandy, is that we built that, but we did not have someone in charge of programming it or running it. And I mean, we spent years trying to persuade the Parkway institutions that they should come outside with activities, and all of them are challenged for revenue, and therefore when they put their restaurants inside, they want to keep everybody inside. So it's not realistic there. You need some other we manage Sister Cities Park right next to it, and that's actively programmed. That's what my point is. You need an entity that's managing these, that's well sourced in funding to make them work. Inga, a building may not work on top. It was just my point. You need a revenue source to make this work.
I think my personal experience from that cap in front of the library is pretty loud. Like when you're out there, you don't have the illusion that you're not standing on. You're right next to a highway. And so for me, that's a lesson learned that we should probably do better.
Good one.
For this cap.
Yes, in the back. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you, first of all. And, it was John and his staff, Yue Wu, who's moved on, did a lot of that, shoe leather to get, I think, it was 70-some support letters from community members. Yeah. It was a lot. Yeah, it was a lot. I think if you can stay involved, take the survey, send the links to your constituents, get people to show up at the visioning workshop. There'll be another survey and visioning workshop sometime in July probably. First one is to get the pieces. At the one over the summer, we'll put together 3 distinct alternatives that we'll share with the public. So please stay involved, and then I think that's what you can really do. Send the survey out. Let people know about the visioning workshop. Retweet our tweets on
April
OTIS
26th.
and PCDC. Yeah.
I also want to say, we do a lot of projects in the city and we get a lot of pushback and resistance. I can't say, I don't know if Chris can speak to this. This is not one of them. This is not coming. There's No, nobody's up in arms. Nobody's like, what the hell are you doing? Like this might be better received, well received. It's just making sure that nobody's surprised when it comes. We don't want, like, I didn't know that was happening. It's just keeping people informed to spread the word. So this is not in the resistance pool. One more question. Anyone? Last chance. Going. The 250 that Danielle is, do you work there? Oh, hi Danielle.
No, we have not, we've not made the connection yet. Yeah, do you want to?
That's Danielle. It's a great marketing tool too.
Thanks a lot, Danielle. I think it's hopefully this isn't stating the obvious too much, but there's just no way it'll get under construction by then. But I think, but if we could have it be part of the events and part of the public conversation, that would be great.
Danielle, if you could get Ben Franklin to endorse this, I think it would be great.
Okay, that's it for us. Thank you.
Okay, so that is the first part. That's not it. That was just the first part of the evening. My job is to segue into the second part of our programming, where maybe we talk about a possibility of how we might have nice things in the future. I'm going to introduce the students. They are second year Master of City Planning students at University of Pennsylvania. There's capstone studio in urban design. Nando and I are co-leading this studio, and it was really a convergence of our professional and academic interests in reconnecting communities, and rooted in the reality of this federal program. So appreciate all the mention of Boston, because we had the opportunity to take our students to Boston, look at the Rose Kennedy Greenway, talk about maintenance and feasibility of building a CAP. What is the long-term impact of funding a project of this size? And we had our students look beyond the boundaries of the Chinatown Stitch and look at the entire Vine Street corridor. So river to river, highway to highway, and they're gonna give a brief introduction, and then we welcome you all to come walk around, look at their boards. They're gonna be posted up. We appreciate feedback. Their final review is in 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks, so any feedback you can give them is welcomed. And some of them are still looking for jobs. So they all graduate this year. Look out for them. They're wonderful. And so Helen and Joanne, I'm going to invite you both to come up, and they're going to give a brief overview of their studio work. Sounds good.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you to all the panelists and for DAG for having us here, the panelists for your amazing presentation that helps us segue into the studio project that we've been working on. My name is Helen, this is Joanne, and we'll be doing a sort of overview of what our studio has been working on before we move over to the boards. So who we are the second year urban design capstone city planning students that you've been hearing so much about tonight. We are led by Nando and Danielle, our fearless leaders, and we all come from a variety of backgrounds. There's 11 of us in the studio, ranging from architecture, landscape architecture, historic preservation, environmental science, and city planning, of course. So we have a lot of cool perspectives coming into the studio, and are excited to tackle this project from those many lenses. What we're looking at in this studio is, as we've been discussing in the case of Chinatown and the Vine Street Expressway, highways across the United States have divided communities for generations. These are just 3 of the precedents that we've been looking into this semester. Boston, Houston, and Seattle are pictured here, but we've been looking into dozens of case studies on how highways have been dividers and then how we can stitch back across those. Our studio has been specifically, of course, investigating the Vine Street Expressway, and we're looking into new ways to approach the design of this corridor to reconnect downtown Philadelphia. The first few weeks of our semester were spent envisioning 2 different visions for the corridor. The first is the highway to boulevard concept, and the second is cap and cover. The cap and cover proposal applied the approach of the Chinatown Stitch, where we're capping over the expressway to the entire corridor, while the highway to boulevard approach looked into replacing the highway altogether, as Paul mentioned, with an at-grade boulevard with a much lower traffic volume. As a studio, we decided to move forward with the highway to boulevard vision, as it was a chance for us to push the boundaries of a new Vine Street concept and envision an ideal human-centric design. As second-year city planning students, we do have the luxury of being able to dream big, and we've been enjoying the challenge of re-envisioning the entire Vine Street corridor. So moving into our highway to boulevard approach, our vision for this project is that highway to boulevard is reimagining the future of urban connectivity in Philadelphia and beyond. Of course, we're looking at regional connections as well. To kind of break this down into a tangible framework to design around, we came up with 3 strategies. The first thing we're trying to do is restore grid connections in Philadelphia, then look into ways to foster community-driven public-private partnerships. Say that 10 times fast. And then also making this an enhanced cultural artery. To break that down even further, we have 4 key goals that kind of guide us when we're implementing these strategies. The first is that we want to create contextual and interactive experiences. We want connected and comfortable streetscapes. We want to celebrate cultural and historical diversity. And finally, we want this to be a place that has resilient and accessible community health. So moving into our actual site, this is the study area that we've been looking at this semester, stretching from Hamilton Street in the north to Cherry Street in the south. And from river to river, as Danielle mentioned, where everything from the Schuylkill and the Schuylkill Expressway over to I-95 and the Delaware River. And you can see here the Vine Street Expressway and its connections in red really divides this whole corridor in half. Let's see. Moving into, this is the master plan of Highway to Boulevard. Our studio has been working on this semester, and this is the point we're at now. And this mends the rift by recentering open space and new development onto Vine Street and improving multimodal connections. How did we get there? That was a big plan just to drop on you. So moving back to the existing conditions, which I know you all probably are very familiar with, our beautiful Vine Street corridor. We first identified the current parks, streets, and development constraints that surround the expressway. Moving into kind of a representation of that here. We were then able to bring in the strategy of reconnecting the grid, changing those streets into something more pedestrian friendly, and moving blocks into the former footprint of the expressway. Then we layer in plazas and parks distributed across the corridor. And finally, we bring in new buildings and development into our development opportunity areas. This plan seriously relies on systems. So breaking down some key systems that we've been fostering for this plan, including streets, open space, and transit. I'll start us out with streets here. Our existing conditions face a lot of challenges, and we've been talking about this a bit tonight, first with the 2 major highway connections on either side of Vine Street, and then the 13 high injury network roads that Chris was mentioning that intersect all over the corridor. Those create a lot of hazards for both cars and pedestrians, so we wanted to figure out how to alleviate that. Philadelphia has a strong grid network through Center City, but the Vine Street Expressway interrupts many of those north-south connections and creates those hazards I was mentioning. The Highway to Boulevard proposal redistributes traffic onto a Vine Street, Callow Hill Street corridor, shown here in red. And that's where we're trying to direct all of the traffic that we historically saw along the Vine Street Expressway. We're distributing traffic on either end of the expressway as well, helping people exit off of those highways and into the city grid, alleviating that pressure on the I-76 Schuylkill Expressway side through a split boulevard at Vine and connections at Arch, Market, and Chestnut Streets. And in the east, traffic is distributed from I-95 and the Benjamin Franklin Bridge along Cowell Hill, Vine, and Race. Pass it over to Joanne.
Hi everyone, I'm Joanne Zhao, and I'm glad to be here to share with you our plan. I'll pick up from the green network analyze. So this is an existing green network along our Vine Street Expressway. From this map, we can conclude that comparing with the corridor ends on east and west end, Chinatown has less access to the open space. But after our proposal, these are the new parks and major green networks in our proposal. So with our proposal converting the expressway to the boulevard, Vine Street and the Cowell Hill Street on the north will be two major green streets and network in the future. Based on the major green street system, there will be new resilient green grid to reconnect the neighborhood once split up by the Vine Street and the expressway and help create a pedestrian haven. Besides, the highway to boulevard proposal will also benefit the transit network. This is an existing condition for about the public transit system and along the Vine Street corridor. So we can conclude that the 60% of the corridor is not within the 5-minute walking range of a real public station, and also the east-west transit connection are limited. So based on this condition, we first proposed a new trolley line for the east-west connection along the corridor. As you can see, the dashed line represents where the trolley line will go underground by taking advantages of the original Vine Street Expressway space. It will go underground at the 22nd Street station, and it will go above ground again at the 8th Street station. There are 3 roads actually in this trolley line for east-west connection along the corridor. So here is Route 1. Route 1 connects to the West Philly as a start station. And after the 8th Street station, it will make a loop along the Race and Cowell Hill Street and to the final stop, Girard Avenue on the north. And Road 2, it connects the Strawberry Mansion on the west. And on the east, it will also make a loop along these 2 streets. We'll make a loop at along the Race Street and the Cowell Hill Street and to the final stop, Navy Yard on the south. So here is Route 3. Route 3 is a north-south connection along the whole Delaware River Bank Trail. Let's zoom out and have a look at the regional connection after our proposal. So this is an existing condition of the public transit system on the Philadelphia map. And here is our proposed trolley line. With the new trolley line, we can utilize the new Vine Street corridor to supplement the regional connection that Philadelphia may need in the future. After finish our corridor plan, we need to split up to individual or like 2 to 3 person small groups to design a small area plan. First, as our framework, we identify 5 key districts along the Vine Street corridor. They are first Museum South, and then Parkway, and then the 3rd district, Arts North, and the 4th one, Chinatown, and then the last one, Franklin East. But meanwhile, for these districts, these boundaries definitely will be blended and blurred because there are a lot of features in each district that are connected and interacting with each other. So, ta-da, we just blended the boundaries. So like puzzle pieces, we split these 5 main districts into 8 small individual areas, and we discuss, coordinate, and cooperate with each other's group a lot through our whole design process. So these are our individual plan and their name, and we'll briefly introduce that to you. start with Helen.
I'm just going to briefly introduce an overview of the first 4 districts here, and then that gives you an idea of sort of orientation moving over to the boards. Starting with on the west side, the West Riverwalk community. The West Riverwalk Community Redevelopment Project aims to transform the neighborhood into an ideal location with more affordable housing options. The addition of commercial spaces to the ground floor of newly developed apartment buildings will cater to retail demands and attract more visitors to the area. The creation of public green spaces and implementation of Sponge City concepts will promote a more resilient environment and improve overall living experiences for residents. Moving east, next is Logan Square and Fair around the Parkway. And Logan Square and Fair works to resolve circulation issues prompted by the Highway to Boulevard project at the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. It then gives a portion of the parkway back to the people through circulation and open spaces. The design turns Logan Square and the parkway into a public space used and loved by the people in a high-density urban context. Third is Broad and Vine. Broad and Vine is an intergenerational community that bridges across income and age to foster connections from people to people and from people to place. The design strategy builds on the influence of Avenue of the Arts on South Broad Street to activate new infill development and draw people into the neighborhood. Mixed income housing, new business opportunities, artistic spaces, and an integrated open space network create a new cultural hub that also serves as a contextual link between neighborhoods along the corridor. And the last one in our first half is Reshaping the Rail Park. Reshaping the Rail Park transforms the way that Philadelphia can engage with the unused rail line. It seeks to extend Chinatown development closer to Broad Street and bridge the urban fabric of Center City to development north of Vine through park space, streetscape, and intentional mixed-use development. The project's main goal is to recenter the area's narrative around the existing community and create opportunities to consciously invest in economic development. Joanne?
So the second half, which all locates in this room. So the Chinatown, first is the Chinatown Reconnect Chinatown project. Chinatown strives to ameliorate the divide that the Vine Street Expressway has created through an approach that respects the existing neighborhood's culture and fabric while strengthening its capacity of development. By addressing key needs within the neighborhood, the project hopes to achieve a vision of robust and culturally resilient Chinatown. And then we move to Chinatown TOD, which is my project. Feel free to throw me any question. So in addition to the original BSL subway, the Petco regional railway, and the new trolley line, the Chinatown West area will incorporate stations of 3 public transportation systems, which will attract more people in the future and significantly increasing the surrounding land value. Therefore, the keywords of this blog is transit-oriented development. It will not only focus on the development density, also the land price, but also throughout the aim to create a warm, active, and functional community throughout various scales of transportation system as a new Chinatown connection and as a new Philly's East Gateway. And then we came into the Old City Business Corridor. In the Old City Business Corridor, after the highway was removed, a high-density commercial district was created using the vacant parcels with great potential for development. Through mixed use and programming with the continuous open space, the whole community becomes more functional and dynamic. And then the last one is the adaptive industrial ecosystem, which is the Delaware River waterfront. It offers a prime location for an innovative sustainability campus that integrates art and science to promote environmental stewardship. The area will hold a friendly network of walkways, bike paths, trolleys, buses, and ferries that will uphold the site as an accessible, low-carbon destination. Through a symbiotic relationship between the natural environment and the human infrastructure, this campus serves as a both living classroom and a functional shield against the impacts of climate change. So all these are 8 area plans come together to create this new Highway to Boulevard Vine Street Corridor vision. We would love to share more about our work after this presentation, and we are happy to answer your questions, and feel free to give your feedbacks and suggestions to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So that's basically the end of our program, and we invite you to see the boards, and the students will be there to get feedback and to answer questions about how they've gotten to the projects that they're proposing. And again, thanks so much to the panelists and our lovely moderator. And thanks so much for coming out in person for DAG.